A court decision puts Trump in unfamiliar territory. 1 minute ago, a ruling emerged from a courtroom that did not sound dramatic, did not raise its voice, and did not seek attention, and yet it landed with force. This decision quietly moved Donald Trump into a space he has rarely occupied, a place where delay no longer works, where narrative control weakens, and where the rules are written and enforced by institutions that do not respond to power or personality. For years, Trump's public life has been shaped by his ability to dominate the environment around him. He sets the tone, reframes the conflict, and shifts pressure outward. Courts disrupt that pattern. They impose structure where chaos once helped him. This ruling is not just about legality, it is about authority. And for perhaps the first time in a long while, Trump is reacting instead of directing, responding instead of commanding. What makes this moment unusual is not only what the court decided, but how firmly it decided it. There is no ambiguity here, no invitation to negotiate through media appearances or political pressure. The court speaks in obligations, deadlines, and consequences. That language is unfamiliar terrain for Trump, whose instincts are built around flexibility and leverage. In this space, leverage disappears, and compliance becomes the only currency that matters. This is where the shift becomes visible. The legal system does not respond to rallies, social media posts, or loyalty displays. It responds to filings, orders, and enforcement. The ruling effectively redraws the map Trump has been navigating. He is no longer operating in the realm of persuasion or spectacle. He is now inside a process designed to function regardless of who stands at its center. There is also a deeper institutional signal embedded in this decision. Courts move slowly by design, but when they move decisively, it is deliberate. This ruling communicates that patience has limits, that process has progressed, and that the system is prepared to assert itself. For Trump, whose strategy often relies on exhausting institutions into retreat, this moment signals that retreat is not on the table. Rachel Maddow-style narration lingers on this point because it matters. Power behaves differently when it is no longer personal. Judicial power does not care about status or history. It only cares about jurisdiction and authority. Trump's unfamiliarity here is not weakness of intellect, but mismatch of environment. The tools he trusts are ineffective inside a system designed specifically to resist them. What unfolds next is not about drama, but about constraint. The ruling narrows Trump's available moves. Each response must now pass through legal channels rather than political ones. That transition is subtle, but it is decisive. Once inside this framework, momentum shifts away from the individual and toward the institution. And institutions, unlike individuals, do not tire, bargain emotionally, or back down under pressure. This is why this court decision matters beyond Trump himself. It demonstrates how democratic systems reassert control when tested. The unfamiliar territory Trump now faces is not accidental. It is intentional. It exists to ensure that influence does not override law. And as this process continues, the story will not be written by speeches or headlines, but by orders, enforcement, and consequences that cannot be ignored. It begins with what happens after the ruling, not in headlines, but in silence. Because courts do not celebrate their power, they exercise it. Once the decision is issued, the machinery begins to move quietly. Deadlines are marked, obligations are defined, and for Donald Trump, this moment marks the transition from resistance to reckoning, where strategy gives way to compliance, and delay becomes increasingly difficult to sustain. Trump's political strength has often relied on framing conflict as personal or partisan. Courts remove that framing entirely. There are no sides here, only procedures. The ruling forces Trump into a posture he has historically avoided, submission to a timeline not of his choosing. This is not about winning an argument. It is about meeting requirements. And requirements do not respond to rhetoric or pressure. What becomes clear in this phase is how differently institutions operate compared to individuals. A court does not rush, but it also does not forget. Each step builds on the last. Each filing creates a record. Trump's past ability to outpace consequences relied on noise and distraction. This process allows neither. Everything is documented, everything accumulates, and nothing disappears simply because attention shifts elsewhere. This ruling also reshapes the political environment around Trump. Allies grow cautious. Advisors choose words more carefully. Public defenses soften. That is because legal exposure does not spread evenly. It isolates. The court's authority changes calculations not just for Trump, but for everyone connected to him. Suddenly, proximity carries risk, and risk has a way of thinning even the most loyal circles. Rachel Maddow-style analysis pauses here because this is where democratic systems reveal their quiet strength. The court does not need to confront Trump publicly to constrain him effectively. It simply narrows his options. Each path forward becomes procedural, monitored, and enforceable. The spectacle fades, replaced by process, and in that shift, control steadily transfers away from the individual and back to the institution. Trump's unfamiliar territory deepens as consequences become tangible rather than theoretical. This is no longer about potential outcomes or future risks. The ruling creates immediate obligations that demand response. Failure carries penalties that are not symbolic. Courts do not issue warnings for effect, they issue them as precursors, and this stage signals that escalation is no longer hypothetical. What follows is a slow tightening rather than a sudden collapse. Democratic accountability rarely arrives all at once. It advances incrementally, step by step, decision by decision. That pace frustrates those accustomed to dominating the news cycle, but it is precisely this steadiness that gives institutions their endurance. Trump cannot outpace a system that moves deliberately and never stops. By the end of Part 2, the picture is unmistakable. The ruling has done more than challenge Trump legally. It has repositioned him structurally. He is no longer shaping the battlefield. He is navigating it. And as this process continues, the defining question is no longer how Trump fights back, but how far the system is prepared to go now that it has begun to assert itself. The pressure now shifts from legal theory to lived reality. Court decisions may be written on paper, but their impact is felt in schedules, constraints, and consequences. For Donald Trump, the space to maneuver narrows noticeably. Every public move now carries legal weight. Every statement risks becoming evidence. This is the phase where visibility, once his greatest asset, begins to work against him. Trump's instinct has always been confrontation, but confrontation loses its power when the other side does not respond emotionally. Courts respond only procedurally. That imbalance creates frustration. No rally can change a filing deadline. No social media post can alter judicial authority. The familiar tools that once dominated political cycles now feel blunt, ineffective, and increasingly irrelevant inside this framework. What's striking here is the contrast between speed and permanence. Trump thrives on immediacy, on fast reactions and louder counterattacks. The legal system operates in slow motion, but each movement is permanent. Once something enters the record, it stays. This is not a moment that can be rewritten later. The decisions made now will echo far beyond the current news cycle. Behind the scenes, the consequences deepen. Legal teams reassess strategy. Financial exposure is recalculated. Political advisors begin separating optics from reality. These are quiet shifts, rarely visible on camera but deeply consequential. Power does not disappear suddenly, it erodes. And erosion is most dangerous when it goes unnoticed until the structure itself begins to weaken. This moment also reframes Trump's relationship with institutions he once challenged openly. Courts do not negotiate authority, they assert it. Compliance becomes the only viable option, not because of persuasion, but because of enforcement. This is where democratic systems reveal their resilience, not through spectacle, but through inevitability. Resistance becomes symbolic, process becomes decisive, public reaction starts to shift as well. The narrative moves from outrage to assessment, from shock to calculation. Viewers begin asking different questions, not whether Trump will fight, but what the limits of that fight actually are. When the conversation changes, influence changes with it. The courtroom replaces the campaign trail as the central stage of consequence. What makes this phase so significant is its predictability. Once a court asserts authority, the next steps are rarely surprising. They are procedural, methodical, and enforced without drama. Trump has spent years redefining norms. Here, norms reassert themselves, not aggressively, not emotionally, simply by continuing to function exactly as designed. By the close of this section, one reality stands out. Trump is no longer driving the narrative forward. He is responding to it. And in democratic systems, response is not power, it is adjustment. The ruling has set a direction. The system is moving. And whether Trump adapts or resists, the momentum now belongs to the institutions he once believed he could outlast. At this stage, the story stops being about Donald Trump alone. It becomes about the system responding to a stress test. Court rulings are not dramatic endings. They are structural signals. They show where authority actually lives. What unfolds now is less visible but more powerful. Compliance, enforcement, and the quiet continuation of democratic mechanisms that do not require applause to function. This is where the story settles into its final shape. Trump remains a figure of consequence, but no longer the axis around which the system turns. The ruling does not erase him, it repositions him. And repositioning is often more consequential than removal, because it redraws the boundaries of power without destabilizing the structure itself. By the end of this chapter, one conclusion becomes unavoidable. The system held, not perfectly, not effortlessly, but effectively. A court decision placed a former president into unfamiliar territory, and democracy did what it has always done at its best. It absorbed the pressure, enforced the rules, and continued forward without asking permission from anyone.